When people hear the word Buddhism, they picture temples, incense, statues, monks in saffron robes, all the beautiful cultural layers that grew over centuries. But if you peel those layers back, if you set aside the rituals, the stories, the traditions, something surprising appears beneath it all. Buddhism isn't just a religion. It's a method, a way of investigating the mind, a science of experience. And to understand that, we have to go back, not to a temple, but to a quiet moment under a tree 2,500 years ago. The Buddha never asked for belief. This alone is unusual. Most spiritual traditions begin with a command, believe. But the Buddha said the opposite. Don't believe anything simply because I said it. Test it, experience it, see for yourself. This is the first sign that Buddhism isn't built on faith, but on experiment. His teachings work like hypotheses. If you watch the mind, you'll see suffering. If you examine craving, you'll find its root. If you train attention, clarity grows. If you understand impermanence, fear softens. These aren't things you accept. These are things you discover. Buddhism begins where modern science stops, inside the mind. Science studies the outer world, atoms, cells, planets, energy. But the Buddha turned the microscope inward. He asked, why do we feel restless even when life is good? Why does desire never seem to end? Why do thoughts push us around? Why can't the mind simply be still? What exactly is this self we defend so fiercely? These aren't theological questions. They're psychological ones. Meditation, the method he taught, is basically a laboratory for observing consciousness. A scientist watches a chemical reaction. A meditator watches mental reactions. Anger rising, fear tightening the chest, desire pulling attention, thoughts forming and dissolving, the sense of I flickering moment by moment. And through this observation, patterns appear. Patterns that modern neuroscience is beginning to confirm. The Buddha mapped the mind the way scientists map the universe. He spoke about attention, habit loops, clinging, conditioning, the gap between perception and reality, the illusion of a fixed, solid self. Long before psychology existed, he described the mind in ways that echo today's cognitive science. He realized, we suffer not because of the world, but because of our reactions to the world. A simple sentence, but it changes everything. It means freedom isn't a reward from a god, or a prize for good behavior. It's a shift in perception, a new way of seeing. So, is Buddhism a religion? Yes, when it works that way. Across Asia, Buddhism blossomed into temples, chants, monasteries, rituals. For millions, these are meaningful. They offer community, tradition, beauty, comfort. So yes, Buddhism can be a religion. But none of these things are required to understand the heart of the path. You can be atheist, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or spiritual but not religious, and still learn from Buddhist practice. Because Buddhism isn't ultimately about belief. It's about training the mind. Buddhism is something you practice, not something you believe. A scientist isn't a scientist because they believe in science. They're a scientist because they do the experiments. Likewise, you don't become Buddhist by believing. You become Buddhist by observing, by understanding, by seeing clearly. The Buddha didn't create a dogma. He discovered a method. Observe experience. Notice the causes of suffering. Train the mind to let go. Wake up to clarity. That's why so many modern people say, I'm not Buddhist, but Buddhist ideas changed my life. Because the value doesn't come from identity. It comes from insight. So, what is Buddhism really? If you step into a temple, it looks like a religion. If you sit quietly and watch your thoughts, it feels like psychology. If you study impermanence, it feels like philosophy. If you explore consciousness, it feels like science. Buddhism slips through every category because it is a mirror. It shows you what you need. To some, it's spiritual. To others, practical. To others, philosophical. But at its core, beneath all the cultural layers, Buddhism is something very simple, a manual for understanding the mind and breaking the patterns that make us suffer. No dogma, no blind faith, only the courage to look within. And when you truly look, you discover the mind is trainable, suffering has causes, clarity is possible. Peace is not something you pray for, it's something you practice. And enlightenment, the most mysterious word of all, is simply seeing reality without the distortions of fear, desire, and illusion. This isn't religion. This isn't psychology. This isn't philosophy. This is freedom. And that, perhaps, is what Buddhism truly is.